بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
يا أيها الناس كلوا مما في الأرض حلالا طيبا ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين إنما يأمركم بالسوء والفحشاء وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to our UKIM Sisters Wellbeing series on mind, body and soul. I am your host Nazia Anjum, and for those who don't know me, I've been associated with UKIM for many years. I've been responsible in running many parenting programs, youth classes, Sisters Cafe, much more. My background is early years teaching, and I will be with you for the next hour and inshallah for the next couple of weeks because this has been a 5-week series. For those who have just tuned in, welcome aboard. Thank you for everyone who has stayed with us and started with us from our first session, which was a bit of a recap. I'll just let you know. We did cover in our first week spiritual well-being. Last week, if you didn't get a chance to join in, we did financial matters. And today we'll be looking at physical health and well-being. Now, before we start, just a reminder as well, please do share the link with family and friends so they can benefit too with these series. If you don't get a chance to listen to all of the program, because I know life is a bit busy at the moment at home, you can also listen to it afterwards on via YouTube. So please do forward it again to all your family and friends so they do benefit from there. So, without further ado, like I said, we are covering physical health and well-being, but just for those who don't know the format, so we will have our guest speaker who will take us through lots of wonderful practical tips and strategies with our physical health and well-being. But the agenda is, and what we will do, so we'll have our guest speaker, and then we will have a chance to have question and answers at the after our guest speaker. And if you can, raise your hands when you want to ask a question, and the technical team will unmute you. If you can, please try and keep your questions brief as possible so we can get as many questions in as we can. Just a bit of housekeeping as well. Please, whilst the talk is going along, could you keep your videos off and your mics on mute, please, just to avoid some background disruptions, because then it gets a bit difficult to hear. Apologies again for last week for any technical issues. Please do bear with us. I know there's a new way of working with Zoom and Microsoft Teams. We're hoping, inshallah, lockdown is going to be over so we can get back to so-called normal. But yes, last week I do apologize. I did get a chance to hear you at the end with lots of questions. So Jazakallah, everybody who asked lots of questions to our speaker. Like I said, you will get another chance today as well. So yes, yet again, apologies again for some technical issues. Please do bear in mind, because at the moment the weather's a bit bad as well as internet connections get a bit low. But do stay with us and we'll try our very best to make this program as smooth as possible. So without further ado, we have a guest expert with us. We have Dr. Ahmed Rashid, who is a clinical associate professor in London's medical school. So just a little bit of background about our doctor today. He completed his medical training in London, Birmingham and Cambridge. He has MSc in distinction in cardiology from the Imperial College in London, and he is the chief examiner for the GMC PLAB exam for overseas doctors. He has lectured on medical topics in many different countries around the world, such as China, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, UAE, Egypt, Saudi, Jordan, Ethiopia, Pakistan, and Canada. A very active professional indeed. So, I won't take any much more of your time. We're all raring to listen to how we can keep our physical health and well-being in this pandemic. So, whenever you're ready, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ahmed Rashid.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I don't know if you can hear me okay, if somebody could confirm that the volume's working.
Yes,
brother,
we can
we can
hear
hear.
you. That's absolutely fine.
Fantastic. Okay, well, sincere gratitude to the organisers of this event for asking me to come and give this presentation. It's an honour and a privilege. I hope to briefly in this session outline to you some considerations with regards to the physical health aspect of living through this COVID-19 pandemic that we've all been facing in the last year. So clearly the pandemic has taken an enormous effect on all of us. And I think it's important that we recognize both the direct impact of the pandemic in terms of both the loss of life and the significant effect it's had on the long-term health of people that have suffered from it, but also on the indirect impact of the pandemic. And what I mean by that is the fact that there has been considerable disruption to the National Health Service and to other health services around the world, but also a significant impact on the non-health aspects of our lives. So work, school, our social lives, the fact that we haven't been able to visit mosques, we haven't been able to go into each other's homes. And I think it's clear to all of us, and I'm sure it'll be clear even more so in the future, that there has been a considerable non-health, non-direct impact of this pandemic. So I've been asked to talk particularly about three different areas. The first is physical activity. The second is diet. And the third is particularly about the COVID-19 vaccination program. So those will be the three areas that I'll cover in this presentation. There will, of course, be opportunities for you to ask questions at the end. So please do note down any questions that you have. I'll be more than happy to take those at the end. I will stop very briefly in between, just if there's anything very urgent that you'd like to ask by way of clarification in between each of those three topics. Okay, so the first of those three topics is physical activity. Now, why do we need to consider physical activity during this pandemic? Well, the obvious reason for that is that this pandemic is a respiratory virus and it's spread in an airborne way. And that means, as we all know very well, that there have been public health restrictions on all of us in terms of the way we live for nearly a year now, which has meant that we can't spend too much time indoors with other people. And as you can see from this image, it's not necessarily only sneezing and coughing that spread this virus. Actually, even breathing is enough to spread this virus. And that's why being indoors with other people and sharing the same air as them causes a significant increase in the risk of picking up this virus from an infected individual, including somebody with no symptoms. So what has been the impact of this? Well, it's meant that we can't go to usual places of physical activity. And what I mean by that is gyms, badminton courts, all the other places, recreational places that we might go to do exercise are now no longer possible for us to use. And that has a significant impact on people, because it is not only a means of recreation, it's not only a means of leisure, but it also has a significant impact on our physical health. We all know that exercise has benefits for our body. And I think it's also very clear, and a lot of people are feeling the fact that actually exercise also has an impact on our mental as well as our physical health. So if you look up the guidelines in the UK or in any other part of the world for depression, the first line treatment for depression is exercise. Before you go on to antidepressants or psychological therapies or counseling, actually the very first line for mild depression is exercise. So it's very clear that if we're not exercising, and I can understand that lots of people are very scared and they want to stay in their homes for safety, But it is important that we recognize that this reduction in exercise and physical activity will not only have an effect on our body, but will have an effect on our mind. And I think that's really, really important. And it means that we need to be creative about how we can make up for the lack of gyms and other leisure activities by doing other forms of exercise. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is walking. Now, walking has lots of benefits. It is a form of exercise at any pace. Some people say you know walking is only exercise if you go fast and you increase your heart rate. Well, absolutely, it's true that if you are doing more vigorous forms of walking, that does have an additional benefit in terms of the aerobic effect. So it has an additional benefit for your cardiovascular system. But I would say that any pace of walking, even if you're walking very slowly, is still a valuable form of exercise. As you can see in this image, this person's walking outside in the countryside, and that is fantastic. The reason for that is not only that it's very beautiful to look at and the greenery is uplifting and so on, but also during a pandemic, if you can walk where there are as few other people as possible, then clearly you're going to reduce your risk of picking up this virus from someone else breathing as they walk past you. So definitely, if you're able to access countryside, if you're able to access open space, if you're able to access any type of clear outdoor field or space, I would recommend a very useful form of exercise at any pace. So if you're comfortable going slow, if you're comfortable going quicker, then even better. But irrespective, there will be physical, mental, and I think social benefits of you being outdoors. Some people might say, well, you know, that's all well and good, but there's no countryside near where I live. Well, it doesn't have to be in the countryside. You can walk anywhere. You can walk around the block. You can walk in a residential area. I would say the only area that I would advise of being more careful is in a busy high street where there are lots of shops, people coming in and out, and you're constantly crossing the path of other people. But other than that, I think if you were able to go outside and walk, then there are huge benefits for that all over the body, not just the heart, but you know it has benefits. You know, there are people who lose many stones of weight just from walking because they're able to increase their activity in a more dramatic way. Some of you might have a pedometer. So this is a Fitbit. There are Apple Watches. There are all sorts of other specific pedometers that you wear on your wrist or you wear somewhere else on your body. And they all do the same thing, which is to count how much you've been walking or running or moving. And of course, they're great for some people. For other people, they think, oh, is it, you know, I'm not sure this is for me. Well, the science tells us that if you're counting your steps, or if you're counting your distance in miles, kilometers, or steps, you're much more likely to be more active, to go further. And that is just the nature of humankind. We're a competitive type of being. So we like to compete even with ourselves. So you don't have to have a Fitbit, absolutely don't have to. Almost any smartphone now automatically catches the number of steps you're doing or the distance that you're walking. So if you have an iPhone or a Samsung or any type of smartphone, the chances are it's got an health app on it that automatically counts how many steps that you're doing. Just to say in terms of step count, lots of people say, oh, you have to do 10,000 steps in order for it to be beneficial. 10,000 steps is an enormous distance. That's nearly 5 miles. That's a lot of walking. And I would say don't let that put you off at all, because any amount of walking, any amount of movement is better than none. So I would set yourself much more realistic targets. So if you do 0 walking, aim for 1,000 steps. Or if you do 1,000 already, aim for 3,000. 10,000 is a number that has been promoted by marketing. It's not a scientific number. The only scientific number that we have is a number that is taken from a study of middle-aged women, where they looked at middle-aged women and tried to decide what the right number of steps was in order to prevent things like osteoporosis and to maximize overall health and survival. And what they found in those studies was actually more like 7,000 steps rather than 10,000. So 10,000 is actually, it's a very ambitious target. My recommendation would be measure your steps. At least you know what you're doing. At least you can set yourself some targets. Don't go out and buy a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. You probably have it already as a function on your smartphone. And see where you go. Give yourself a target for this week, next week. By 2 months' time, I want to achieve this target. And as I said, any additional exercise that you do, any additional walking that you do will undoubtedly have an impact on your health and well-being. So some of you may recognize this person. This is somebody called Joe Wicks. He's become very famous because in the first lockdown, he started to do daily PE lessons on YouTube. They're 30 minutes long. They're designed for children who are missing out on PE from being out of school. They're freely available. And really, the reason I put this in is not necessarily for him. I mean, you can choose, there's hundreds, probably thousands of different freely available workouts and exercise routines available on YouTube. And, that they are a way of giving yourself the routine of being within your house and still doing physical exercise. And actually, there are all sorts of different people who are doing this in all different parts of the world. So given that we have YouTube, given that we have the internet, you don't have to limit yourself to an exercise group or instructor who lives near you. You can choose somebody from the other side of the world, and you can do their routines. And actually, some of them are extremely creative. So you don't need any equipment often at all, because they do their exercises based on things you already have in your house. So pick up a bag of sugar, use something as a step, or they're very creative about the way they help you to do those exercises even without specialist equipment. So I'm not here to promote any particular person, but really just to give you the idea of if you're not keen to go outside walking or running or doing any outdoor activity, if you want to stay in your house, or if you've been advised to shield and stay in your house, don't let that stop you. As long as you have YouTube, as long as you have the internet, you have the world at your fingertips, and you can get all of the in-house exercises that suit you and that work for you. The other thing that you can do in your home very safely, even as somebody shielding, is to do activities like yoga and Tai Chi. Now, again, these are forms of exercise and meditation that have a more holistic perspective. So they are more about your overall well-being. They're not kind of aerobic exercise where you're going to run and get your heart rate up, but they're more about relaxation, about flexibility, about core strength. And again, if you type in yoga teacher into YouTube, you'll get tens of thousands of different hits. And I think it's just about finding the one that works for you. And also there are very low level, so there are kind of beginner classes. If you'll think, well, this all looks very difficult, this looks extremely challenging. I have patients who do yoga in their 90s. And they, so there is types of yoga and types of Tai Chi and various other forms of exercise which are suitable for people who cannot do very vigorous exercise, who may have disabilities or limitations. So again, I don't think there is a single best solution, but I think there are lots of different options which will work for different people. So again, it's really just encouraging you to look at what's out there and to really find something that might work for you. Okay, so I'm going to move now on to diet, which is the second part of this talk. And I think we all know intuitively and through the media and through our education that obesity and being overweight is detrimental to our health in all sorts of different ways. Lots of people ask, is there a particular food group that will make me more likely to get the coronavirus, less likely to get the coronavirus. And I know that all of you will have received WhatsApp messages or Facebook or some other type of message to say, if you drink this magic drink or if you eat this magic food, then you won't get the coronavirus. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't know that there's any science behind those or any way of verifying any of those claims. So I can't give you, I'm afraid, any magic solution of a single thing that will make this all go away. What I can tell you from a biomedical, from a scientific perspective, is that we know for sure that obesity is a risk factor for developing more severe coronavirus illness, so COVID, and for death. So that is being demonstrated scientifically in studies all over the world. So absolutely, I can tell you, with a degree of certainty that having obesity is putting people at an increased risk, and not only that, but type 2 diabetes has also been very strongly associated with an increased risk of developing a more severe form of this COVID illness, and also, unfortunately, of death as well. And that tells us that not that there is a particular thing that we should do, or a particular thing that we should avoid or we should increase, but rather we should, each and every one of us, use this as an opportunity to look at where we are with our bodies and to think where we want to be. Because yes, coronavirus is here now. Inshallah, it will be gone soon. Inshallah, humanity will be rid of this in the coming period of time. But what about stroke? What about heart disease? What about cancer? What about arthritis? What about bone problems? All of these different illnesses, liver problems, kidney problems, all of these different illnesses are associated with obesity. So it doesn't have to be coronavirus. It can be any of those illnesses, any of those reasons to prompt us all to look at ourselves and say, well, where do we want to be? What can we do? What can we change? How can we be a better form of ourselves, a healthier form of ourselves? So I think the message is not necessarily that I'm going to give you some diet kind of advice that's specific to this COVID pandemic, but rather to use this as a prompt, because we know that just like lots of other illnesses, this is something that becomes more severe with obesity, that we use this as a prompt to examine how we can reduce our weight. And I would also say here specifically that we know that the composition of bodies from South Asia, from the Middle East, is different to Europeans. So if you look up online BMI, body mass index, which is what's used as a marker for obesity, there are different categories for different ethnicities. Many of us, I'm sure in this meeting, will be from a South Asian background. And from a South Asian background, we have a lower threshold to become obese. So at the same weight, a South Asian person will be obese and a European person won't be obese. And that relates to the distribution of fat within our bodies, which is slightly different to the European body. What does that mean? It means that we need to be even more careful. We need to have an even lower weight relative to our height in order for us not to be obese. Okay, so talking about what we can do in our diet. This food group, which is known as carbohydrates, some people call it carbs, are the food group that causes greatest controversy when it comes to nutrition and diet. And lots of you, I'm sure, will have heard of or tried diets that are designed to lower your carbohydrate intake. So about 10 or 15 years ago, the Atkins diet became very famous, which is a low carbohydrate, high protein diet, which was very famous and very popular for a while. More recently, diets like the keto diet have become more popular, and these diets are very similar in that they also ask you to lower or even maybe cut out completely your level of carbohydrate from your diet. But with the keto diet, it's much more about having you can have fats as well as proteins in that diet. And there's a specific diet called LCHF. So that stands for low carbohydrate, high fat. So anyway, you get the pattern here. The pattern is that with all of these diets, they all ask you to reduce the amount of carbohydrate that you have. And the reason for this is that carbohydrates, bread, pasta, rice, wheat, grain, all of these things are broken down in the body into sugars. And those sugars are implicated in weight gain. And that is the reason why reducing them does cause weight loss. And they are very successful diets in the short term. So if you absolutely cut out this food group, you will lose weight. There's no doubt about it. Everyone who's tried that, I'm sure, will have seen that they do cause a reduction in weight. And I put on weight like lots of people in the first lockdown. And last summer, I went on the keto diet myself for several weeks, and I lost a stone of weight by cutting out carbohydrates for several weeks. So I know from personal experience that it's absolutely possible. But, and there is a but, how long can you remove these foods from your diet? And certainly it was not possible for me, and many other people I've encountered, patients, family members, friends who I know who try this, all say the same thing, which is, how long can you go without chapati? How long can you go without rice? How long can you go without toast for breakfast? Extremely difficult. Because these food groups are a part of our diet. They're a part of our culinary experience. It's a social thing, it's a cultural thing. And therefore, is it sustainable? No, I would suggest for many people, it's not sustainable in the long term to completely remove these foods from your diet. But maybe having an awareness of what you're eating, and particularly awareness of the amount of carbohydrate you're eating, is probably a good thing. In fact, I would suggest that it is a good thing. Because if you're having predominantly carbohydrate meals for all of your meals and all of your snacks, then there is a lot of room for you to actually improve, even if not to completely cut them out, to actually transform some of those meals or some of those snacks into predominantly protein or fat or other types of foods, which could have an important difference. I would also say anything that is a single solution to weight loss is never a good idea. So what's a much better idea is doing lots of different things together. So if you can increase your exercise by doing more steps, if you can lower your carbohydrate, if you can increase other foods, other healthier foods, if you can do lots of different things together, that's much more likely to be successful. And I would suggest also it's much more likely to be sustainable in the longer term. One of the questions that the organisers of this event asked me to cover was about comfort eating. Clearly, we're all stressed, and we have been very stressed with the fear of this deadly virus and various other stresses that have come about as a result of this for people's livelihoods, and for the lockdowns and all the other indirect impacts of this pandemic. And stress is implicated with comfort eating, and that is mediated through a hormone called cortisol. So cortisol is the stress hormone in the body, and cortisol drives hunger, and it drives a very particular type of hunger that tends to kind of lead people to going for those very filling foods, which tend to be the carbohydrate dominant foods. So I'm sure all of us, when we've been very hungry, will remember and think of examples of when we've been so hungry that nothing will alleviate that hunger other than a big portion of chips or a big plate of biryani. That hunger which is really only alleviated by having a big filling meal. And that is related to your body. That's related to the hormones in your body that are driving that. So what I would suggest is, firstly, we can snacking we know is a problem. Snacking is a problem for many of us and does cause weight gain, because you often don't realize when you're snacking tracking just how many calories you're taking in, just how much you're eating, and it's very difficult to control how much you eat in snacks. So one way is to avoid snacks altogether. So by structuring your meals in a way that you're having 3 good meals in a day, so you're not missing breakfast or missing lunch, because that does lead to snacking. But also think about which snacks you have in your house. Most snack food is very high in carbohydrate. So lots of people snack with crisps, chocolates, other types of foods, even foods that we have in the eastern part of the world that are snack foods are often carbohydrate dominant. So it's worth thinking, because we all slip up, we all have those moments where we need a snack. Which snacks do I keep in my house? If in your house you have carbohydrate snacks, that's what you'll end up eating. But if you think about low carb snacks, and particularly, there are things like having yogurts, cheese, lots of dairy foods can be useful to have in terms of those snacks, just to avoid, because they can be quite filling as well. So that can avoid having the higher carb snacks. And I would just strongly urge you to think about what you're keeping in your cupboards, what's in your fridge for those moments where you are stressed, where you do need something. What is it available, and what is it that you'll be eating? And the final thing I'd like to say about diet is to talk about the Mediterranean diet. Many of you will have heard of the Mediterranean diet. It's actually a bit misleading, because the Mediterranean diet is not the diet eaten in the Mediterranean world today. It's not. If any of you have been to Greece or Italy or southern parts of France and various other parts that articulate with the Mediterranean Sea, those countries and those cultures and those places now is not what we're talking about when we talk about the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is a historic diet from the 1960s and 70s that was adopted by farmers and fishermen living around the Mediterranean Sea. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the Mediterranean diet. And it has a lot of fish, it has a lot of fruit and vegetables, it has a lot of cheese. And this particular diet style has been shown in quite a lot of research studies now to be beneficial for all sorts of different health problems. So cardiovascular problems, heart problems, strokes, dementia. There's lots of research evidence to show that the Mediterranean diet has lots of health benefits. So if you're interested, I'm not going to talk more about it today because we don't really have the time, but the Mediterranean diet is a really interesting diet that can be taken up by an entire family. So it's not just for adults, it can be for children as well. And it basically, you have no red meat in this diet. This diet is dominated by fish and vegetables and various other foods. So if you're interested in that, do have a look at that and find out more about it, because it has many health benefits and is actually very tasty as well. Very delicious kind of menu of options that you can have using the Mediterranean diet. And just finally to say on that, there's a very interesting questionnaire that you can do online, which is the Mediterranean Diet Survey. And what it does is it asks you some questions about your current food habits, and it gives you a score based on how much your current diet aligns with this diet that these fishermen had in the 1960s around the Mediterranean Sea. So it gives you a score of how closely you are to that. And then it sets you some targets to get closer. So it will give you some suggestions. Right now, you're, 20 out of 50 in terms of your Mediterranean diet score. If you want to get to 30 out of 50, here's what to do. If you want to get to 40 out of 50, and basically when you get to 50 out of 50, you're eating exactly as the Mediterranean diet was for those people, 50, 60 years ago, who lived very long, healthy lives and have been the topic of interest for researchers ever since. Okay, so the final area that I'll be talking about today is vaccination, and specifically the COVID-19 vaccination, which is clearly very topical. So we found out today that 15 million people now in the UK have received the first dose of the vaccination, and that obviously many other people, millions of people around the world, have also received those vaccinations, and many scientists have suggested that this is one of the main routes of alleviating humanity from this awful pandemic. I don't want to go too far into the scientific evidence for this, because frankly, I don't think it is helpful to do that. I think it's much more helpful to look at the big picture here. And the big picture is that we have all seen the awful impact of this pandemic. So unfortunately, in my family, we have lost people to this virus. And not just, lots of people say, well, it's only the old people. That's not the case in my family. Younger people have sadly passed away from this virus. I know that many of you in this meeting will have lost relatives, friends, loved ones, members of the community, and our masajid are consistently having janazah prayers for people who sadly have been lost to this virus. So I think my sense is that we all have together a very realistic idea of the seriousness of this virus and of this pandemic, and therefore the importance of us taking the means that we have to reduce the impact of it, and to protect ourselves and our families. The main thing that I want to say really is to encourage you to use the British Islamic Medical Association, BIMA. The British Islamic Medical Association is made up of Muslim doctors, Muslim scientists, Muslim religious scholars who have worked tirelessly. They have done a huge amount of work in the last few months, looking in detail at many questions in the pandemic, including vaccination and various other issues. And these are as many of you will know, the two main vaccines that are available in the UK are the Pfizer vaccine and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So these are the two vaccines that are currently being used in the UK. The Moderna vaccine is also licensed for use in the UK, but is not currently being used for supply issues. I think it will be start to be used in the coming weeks and months. The British Islamic Medical Association have taken into account all available information, and you can go on their website for yourself and see the research, very detailed work, mashallah, that they've done. And both of these vaccines, they've put a position statement that says, we recommend this vaccine for eligible Muslim communities. So they are very clear to say that on the basis of both the scientific, the medical, and the religious perspectives, they have clearly recommended both of these vaccines as suitable. And as I say, there are lots of conspiracies, there's lots of misinformation. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the WhatsApp, Facebook, all the other platforms have been full of various different conspiracy theories. Some of them have included things about Bill Gates. Some of them have included things about all sorts of things that, it's probably not worth even talking about some of them, just because of how far-fetched they are. But what they've done on the website, on the BIMA website, is that they've looked at all of these myths, or many of these myths, dozens of these myths, and they've provided factual analysis of each of them, with videos, with position statements, and with various pieces of research. As I say, a huge amount of effort, many thousands of hours of effort from these wonderful Muslim doctors and scientists and scholars who have done this work. So, I personally am very grateful to them. I know some of the doctors who are involved in this who are wonderful servants of the community. Another thing which I just want to mention, and this is the final thing, and then I will stop for questions and any other discussion, is really just to look at this table. I'm I've deliberately not kept this talk by including too much science or too many numbers, but I think this table is remarkable because this shows the 5 vaccines that have currently reported their findings. So Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca, 3 of these are licensed in the UK. The 2 with the stars next to them, Novavax and Johnson & Johnson, are not yet licensed in the UK, but they almost certainly will be in the coming months. They are having regulatory approval analysis at the moment. And the reason I want to show you this table is that there's lots of media talk about 80% effective, 95% effective, 70% effective. What that's talking about is the likelihood of getting COVID after, so catching the virus after having the vaccination. That's what those numbers are talking about. But a really important analysis here, or a really important number, is how many people who received the vaccine died. And that is the middle column there, the number of people who received the vaccine and died. And in every one of those 5, the number is 0. So yes, with each one of these with each one of these vaccines, you can see that 15,000, 18,000, 13,000, 5,800, 22,000. There's a huge number of people who have had these vaccines now. Yes, some of them have gone on to catch COVID, catch the coronavirus, but none of them have been hospitalized. None of them have had a serious illness, and nobody has died from COVID having had a vaccine. Now, of course, in an ideal world, a vaccine would stop us from getting the virus at all. But what's really an important outcome, of course, is that even if you do catch it, that you don't develop the more severe form of illness. And as these data show, that is the case. And in the last column, you can see the number who died from the vaccine. Nobody has died from this vaccine, any of those vaccines, 0. The answer is 0 for every one of those 5 vaccines, which I think is, these numbers to me are extremely reassuring. And I'm urging my patients, my relatives, my friends, my community to look at these numbers if they are unsure, because I see a great deal of reassurance in these numbers. And the final thing to say is side effects. Of course, there can be side effects. There can be side effects from any medicine, from any vaccine, from anything. And people will get a sore arm. I mean, I've had the vaccine. Many members of my family have had the vaccine. Everyone has had some small thing, whether it's a sore arm or felt a bit tired or very mild fever. So these things are happening, but nobody has reported a permanent side effect. These are temporary mild side effects that are resolving. There is no data from any of these studies. And again, please do look on the British Islamic Medical Association website because they've provided all the evidence for this. There are no reported permanent side effects from any of these vaccines. And that is the last thing that I'll say, and I'll stop now to say Jazakallah khair for listening, and I would be very happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. That was very thought-provoking. Lots of practical tips and strategies. Yes, we do have a lot of questions coming in for you. The first is that regarding children, and in particular children with special needs or disabilities. So how can we encourage any tips or strategies for children with disabilities with being a bit more physically active, obviously regarding their situation, obviously because they're stuck at home in lockdown and the pandemic. So what can we do with our children with specific needs? If you could just shed some light on that, please.
Sure. So I think it's a really important question because we know that those children are vulnerable from in various different ways, and particularly are vulnerable and susceptible to developing obesity and so on. I think what's really important with those children is to find what works for them. So I would say it's very difficult to give a blanket recommendation because each child is unique, and will respond differently to different stimuli. And as family members, as parents, you'll know best what time of day will work for them, which time of day is most suitable for them, which time of day are they most likely to be in a mood that would allow that. So if they're more tired in the evenings, and if they're more alert in the mornings and they're more likely to take part, then try and fit it into that time of day. I would do it in a space in which they're comfortable, whether that's in your living room or whichever in their bedroom, whichever space you feel is most suitable. And then I think also to choose something which is appropriate for their intellectual level. So, of course, we know that some children with additional needs have a kind of a different mental capacity to other children of their age. And that may mean looking for resources for children from a different age group to their actual age. So, for example, there are lots of resources there's lots of particular types of activities that are designed specifically for the intellectual curiosity of preschool children. And they use metaphors, they use language that would be appropriate for that age group. And I think I think it's really important to take account of that. So children, for example, that preschool children who are from the ages of between 3 and 5, they have a different language, they have a different kind of approach to play. I think you have to make it fun for them, because otherwise it will be a chore, and if it's a chore, then it won't happen. So I would say find the space and the time of day that works. Think about their not necessarily their actual age, but their intellectual age, and just keep trying. Just keep trying. Something that will be fun for them will be the way that I'm sure you'll find a solution, inshallah.
Thank you ever so much. That was very useful. Just another question here. I know we've got lots more coming in. Just to mention, we've got Ramadan approaching quite soon, around April. What's your thoughts on intermittent fasting and fasting twice a week? Is that any health benefits? Should we be doing that in lockdown? Is it possible?
Yeah, so I was actually going to mention that, and I forgot. So thank you to whoever said that question, because that was on my mind to mention. Amazing that modern medical science has validated and has found evidence for what is in the Sunnah, and I think it's absolutely true that there is very sound, reliable scientific evidence that shows fasting 2 days a week has enormous health benefits. And, of course, it's something that our ummah has been doing, and our communities have been doing for hundreds of years. So yes, absolutely, fasting intermittently, I think is very beneficial for many people. Of course, the usual caveats apply. People who are physically vulnerable, who have long-term medical problems, should discuss that with their physician in the normal way that they would for Ramadan. But absolutely, I think for people who are trying to get healthier, for people who are looking for ways to improve their health and to reduce their weight and to improve various other aspects of their well-being and their bodies, I think it's a very good way of doing that.
Jazakallah, thank you for that. I'm just going to check the chat box, or any sisters or brothers who have raised their hand. Could the technical team let me know? Otherwise, I'm going to check in my chat box if anyone wants to ask a question live to our doctor. You just bear with us, please. We'll just have a look. Is anybody else raising their hand? Otherwise, I will go to our chat box, which I can see numerous questions coming in. If somebody does want to ask live. Right, so another question then I've got in my chat box is, this is to do with getting the family all involved, and as well as, and actually a two-part question here is, how often should we be exercising? You mentioned walking or doing exercise at home if we can't get in about. So should it be every day? I know it's a bit of a question, but should it be every day, and it should be consistent? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, so if you want to go by the guidelines from the Department of Health are for exercise 5 times a week, ideally. And my personal opinion is that daily exercise has enormous benefits. As we know, doing things routinely creates a additional benefit. So in the same way we pray 5 times a day, in the same way we have those rituals that we do every day, they become embedded into our lives. My personal experience is that I have a target for myself, for my exercise. And in the same way that somebody who prays 5 times a day, when they sleep at night, one of the questions they ask themselves before they sleep is, did I pray 5 times today? The same way somebody who does exercise regularly asks themselves, did I do my target exercise today? And that routine of asking yourself every night, being accountable to yourself, again, this is my personal opinion, has enormous benefits, that you're building that into your routine. But I think it does depend on how strenuous the exercise is. So if you think about the fact that doing exercise in a more vigorous way, so if we're talking about going on a 10-mile run, clearly you can't do that every day. Then you have to do that in a more proportionate way. But if we're talking a gentle walk, if we're talking 5,000 steps or 7,000 steps or 10,000 steps, then I personally would suggest that doing that every day is perfectly reasonable, and is, for many people, will have a lot of benefit.
Brilliant, excellent. Does housework constitute to exercise? Because is it all about just keeping active, moving? Because not to be sexist, the question has come in that how can we get the family to all engage and not put a burden on, obviously, the lady of the house? Not saying it's just ladies cleaning houses, but because that does add to a bit of the stress, especially in lockdown. Everybody is at home. There's a lot more, I would say, cleaning up after everyone's eating and so on. So how can the family all get involved? And obviously to alleviate, obviously not this stress on one person, what would your recommendations be? What could we do?
I think in the answer to the first part of the question, does housework count? The answer is yes. If you look at charts of how much calories are being burned, so how vigorously you're working during various different activities during the day, housework is surprisingly vigorous. You use up a lot of calories by doing housework. So it is a good form of exercise. And I would say it's an opportunity for everyone to do exercise. So I think it's a very good idea to say, actually, to hoover the entire house is that's a significant amount of exercise and physical activity. So how can that be shared so that you all benefit from that physical activity? And likewise, various other tasks. I mean, lots of the work that we do around the house, and lots of jobs that can look like chores or can look like something that you don't necessarily want to do. If you flip that around and say, actually, this is X number of calories waiting to be burned, then I think that can be a positive way of looking at it, and by sharing it amongst the family, absolutely.
Oh, excellent. As we know, obviously the gyms are closed, so that's a good way of burning the calories, start cleaning, so getting our other halves to participate as well. Brilliant.
Sister Nazi, Tasleem Ahmed is unmuted. Tasleem Ahmed, can you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, thank you for the information. I've got a question here. Does the vaccine invalidate the fast?
Okay, so I think that's a really important question, because of the fact that people who are receiving their first dose of vaccination now will receive, or will be invited to receive, the second dose of their vaccination in Ramadan. So that will happen for a significant number of people, and for others they'll be invited for the first time for their first dose during that period. Again, I would refer here to the British Islamic Medical Association. They have done research on this, and their answer is no, it does not invalidate the fast. So you can receive this vaccination during a fast, and it does not invalidate your fast. And again, rather than to go into the detail here, I would refer you to that website, because they provide all the evidence there. And if you want to read more about it, they have some excellent information on there, as I said.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to check with the technical team. Do we have time for one more question? Can I just check there? Because I
just one more question, please, and then we can finish it off, inshallah.
That's fine. I think there was somebody else who raised their hand. If you could unmute them, please.
It was Tasneem Ahmed only. I have already unmuted. There's no raised hand more. So
that's fine. That's fine. If there's no more questions, I'm just going to check in my chat box if there was one last one. If we could just squeeze that in. We did have a question. What kind of physical remedies can we try at home? If there are any, because I did hear that somebody did mention, is drinking lemon in water help with weight loss in the mornings? Does that help? Could you just shed some light, please?
Okay, so my answer to that would be that in the sphere of biomedical science, that is not recognized as being effective. The reason I say it in that way is because you know, people have different reasons for doing things and different rationales for doing things, and I don't believe that it's a job of a doctor to disrespect what somebody believes in terms of their own remedies, because they may be coming from a different place. So I certainly would not advise someone to do that, because there is no scientific evidence for that. But as I say, scientific evidence is only one part of our experience as human beings, and people have legitimate other reasons for doing things.
Thank you ever so much. That was excellent. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Ahmed, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Lots of valuable tips and strategies there. So thank you ever so much for doing that for us. Yeah, sorry we couldn't get through everybody else's questions because it is time was limited. Thank you everybody for tuning in on your Sunday evening. Please stay safe. All our thoughts and prayers do go out to those who have lost their loved ones during this COVID. So all our duas are with you. Next week, we will be looking at how to cope with bereavement and loss in the pandemic, and we have a psychotherapist and counsellor, so please do join us for that. Thank you yet again for all your time, everybody, for all those sisters and brothers who have joined us from the start. Please do spread the link to your family and friends so they benefit from these sessions as well. I'd like to now ask Sister Razia if she'd like to conclude our session with a short prayer. Thank you ever so much. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah, Sister Nazi, for your hosting, and Jazakumullah, Brother Dr. Ahmed, for all your valuable information and your time. And I'm hoping that all of us will get benefit and get motivated with all the messages we have received so far. And we finish our session with the dua with Allahumma inni as'aluka bi anna lakal hamd la ilaha illa antal mannanu badius samawati wal ardi ya zil jalali wal ikram ya hayyu ya qayyum bi rahmatika astaghis. O Allah, I ask of you, as all praises for you, there is no deity except you, the most gracious originator of the heavens and the earth, O the most majestic and honorable, O the eternal and self-subsisting, we ask help from you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu fi amanillah.